Mhm.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, friends.
So we're here for the very last time this semester to share some of our favorite books that for one reason or another, we didn't get to share with you earlier. As I was looking through at our previous book talk lists, I realized that I think we did a really good job sharing some recent books. So most of the ones I've got for you are kind of really oldie but goodie books that I want to make sure you realize that that there's some really good old books that are still great. So yeah, so I'm going to go first with my list. Deborah's going to do hers, and then I've got a couple of books that I think might be of interest to you as adults rather than for sharing with children. So first one I've got is A Chair for My Mother by Vera B. Williams. So this is a book that this came out in the 1980s. And Vera Williams is definitely someone worth knowing about. And she grew up in Brooklyn, and she writes, well, let's see, we did share, I shared a book of poetry by her earlier. This is probably her best known book. And it's told in the first person by a girl. And she's talking about how her mother, they really need to get a comfortable chair. And it turns out that the reason is because there was a big apartment fire. And so now they are in a new apartment. It's really small, and they basically have no furniture. So they have a table and chairs and a place for them both to sleep, but no place comfortable to sit. And so it's all about how they save up all their money and eventually go and they find this wonderful secondhand chair that's just beautiful and really comfortable. And they managed to take it home, and they can like cuddle up in this chair. So the great Vera B. Williams, someone to know about. And if you're going to start with a book by her, start with A Chair for My Mother. Another person who just can do no wrong, Donald Cruz, Freight Train. And yeah, some of these, like Vera Williams recently died. Donald Cruz, I know I've shown you at least one book by his daughter, Nina Cruz. Donald Cruz was a really good graphic designer as well. And you could just tell that his, it's just so simply done. And I think the thing that he is so good at, every single one of his books has perfect pacing, and they all read aloud so beautifully. And in this case, you see each of the cars on the train goes by, and then it starts to move, and it's really quite, if you find someone who's reading this well, it gets really exciting. It gets moving faster and faster. And again, your basic a horizontal book, which is horizontal for a really good reason. The next one I've got is Hot Day on Abbot Avenue. This cover might not show up really well, but the colors in here are perfect for a hot day. So it's a hot day in the city. And this is one of Javaka Steptoe's the first books that he illustrated. And especially at the beginning, he had this collage style that he used a lot. But you can also see like some of the same elements that he used much later in his book about Jean-Michel Basquiat. So the thing about Hot Day on Abbot Avenue is it's not just about a hot day in the summer in the city, but it's also about these two really close friends who have a hot day in the sense that on this particular day, they get into this big argument. And it's just so true to life. And I don't know, it just makes you feel as if you are there. Here's one that might seem to be subversive, because nowadays saying something like you stink or I stink is of course a no-no. But in this case, it's a garbage truck who's really proud of the fact that he stinks. And so, there are a lot of kids who love books about vehicles. And Jim and Kate McMullen, husband and wife team, have done a number of these. This was their first one. And each of the trucks that they portray has a very particular characterization. And in the case of the garbage truck, he's completely he loves the fact that he makes noise and wakes everybody up and all of this stuff. So, lots of fun to read, as you can see. You can really play around with the volume that you're speaking at, etc. But it also tells you a whole lot about like what the different parts of the truck are called and all of that. Funny, I seem to have a lot of city books here. The next one is also a city book. This came out in 2003, which is sort of because picture books take about 2 years to create. All of the books that responded to 9/11 came out in 2003. And this is Mordecai Gerstein's book, The Man Who Walked Between the Towers. Nowadays, you would never see a title that's that small, because of course, if this were little on a web page, you wouldn't be able to see it. But back in 2003, they weren't really thinking about that so much. So this book is sort of about the Twin Towers, but it's really about the man, what's his name? Petit? Now I'm gonna forget his name. Is it Philippe? Oh shoot! It's just yes, Philippe Petit, a French man who was a wire dancer. And when the Twin Towers were not quite finished being built, he and some of his friends snuck up there in the middle of the night, and it's quite a suspenseful story about how they managed to get the wire to go from one tower to the other. And really what this is mostly about is a man who decided to dare to do this thing that just is kind of breathtaking. And it also, right after that page I just showed you, there's a page where you turn it this way, and actually you see the entire thing all the way up. So this is something that happened in 1973, I believe. And at the very end, he does make reference to the fact that the towers are not there anymore, but it doesn't sort of belabor the fact about what happened on 9/11. So it's an interesting way to potentially explore that day or that thing that happened in a way that doesn't deal with it quite as directly as some other books. The great James Marshall, Miss Nelson is Missing. This is by Harry Allard, who Marshall collaborated with some. Marshall is always very funny. And this is a terrific school story. Doesn't say what grade they're in, but they're in room 207. The kids are in room 207, and all the books about Miss Nelson are about room 207. In this case, the kids are not really appreciating her very well. And lo and behold, the next day, they have a substitute teacher, Miss Viola Swamp, who just, she really puts them through their paces in a way that makes them realize how good they had it with Miss Nelson. And at the very end, there's nothing in the text that tells you exactly what happened, but you do see Miss Nelson back at home. And if you have sharp eyes, you can see that there's a box that says wigs, and she's got this black dress hanging up in her closet. So it's, the question is, maybe Miss Nelson was really Viola Swamp. What do you think?
That's a great one, Lolly.
I love that book. Yes, yes. This one is more recent. This is the great Gigi Morales, who's fairly new on the scene. And she's done some books that are quite serious, but this one is just really funny. In terms of tone, it's quite similar to I Stink in that it's really way over the top. So this is about wrestling, lucha, and this is El Nino. No, he's El Nino. It was just called Nino, and it's obviously it's a kid in his tidy whities, and it's all about all the different baddies that he's fighting, and the baddies include where are they? Las Hermanitas, which are his little sisters, who their battle cry is that they cry. Yeah. Anyway, it's just tons of fun, And I know of kids who loved it so much that they have, you know, whole, that they really look into the whole wrestling thing, you know, especially wrestling in Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, this is the only chapter book I've got for y'all. Rickshaw Girl. This is by Matali Perkins. She's another one of those people who really swears by SCBWI, because she's someone who really wanted to write for children, did not know how to do it, joined that organization, and at this point, she's had a number of books published. She used to come visit this class, but a few years ago, she moved to the West Coast. Anyway, this is a book. It takes place in India in a rural village. Naima is the main character, and she's sort of forced into doing all the traditional women's work. She loves to paint, and she paints alpanas on the doorway of her house. And her father drives a rickshaw, but when he is unable to drive and they don't have any money coming in, Naima figures out that maybe she could learn to drive a rickshaw herself. So that's why it's called Rickshaw Girl. And I'll just give you a sense of that it's, I would say it's a really good second grade kind of level book, maybe third grade. And there are various decorations and a few illustrations as well. So. Then the last one I have is another oldie, Tar Beach by Faith Ringgold, who started out as a fabric designer. And in fact, if you look around the edges of this book, you can see some of her quilting. There's a sort of a quilting motif that goes on through this book. But Tar Beach refers to the roof of an apartment building where she and her family and some of their neighbors go up in the summertime to play cards, and the kids are allowed to sleep on a mattress up there. And it's a wonderful sort of fantasy about, and maybe it's a fantasy or maybe she's sort of drifting off to sleep. So this is what she's dreaming, but she's so high up in the city, and she says this is the night that she was able to fly, and she flew over the George Washington Bridge, and it's just a beautiful nighttime book about the city. So those are the books on my list, and now it's Deborah's turn.
Well, Lolly, that was a wonderful collection. Just loved all of those. The books that I brought are, some of them are really old favorites, and they have a special place in my heart for various reasons. Others I just think are amazing pieces of literature. The first one I brought is actually an easy reader, because we're going to be doing the Geisel Award in another day or two, and I thought you might be interested in a good easy reader. This is called The Garden That We Grew. It's actually written by Joan Holub and illustrated by Hiroe Nakata, and it's just a sweet book about gardening, growing pumpkins in particular. The illustrations, Nakata's really cheerful watercolors just make this a joy to read. It's a happy, happy book. It has these couplets on each page, it rhymes. It's really a book that I think a young reader would find very appealing. So it was one that I had selected when I was doing a paper on gardens and gardening. Just thought it was really a lovely story and very beautiful circularity. So it's a wonderful one to start with. For
that was your bibliography topic, right?
That was my bibliography topic, yes. And then when I was in adolescent lit, I did novels in verse. So that's where I learned about this, although this is really not specifically a YA novel. This is called Inside Out and Back Again. This is by Tang Lai, and as you can see, it's well decorated with a National Book Award, and I believe it's a Newbery Honor. This is just a gorgeously written story of a 10-year-old girl named Ha, who has to leave Vietnam during the fall of Saigon, and she moves to Alabama with her family, of all places, a very different culture. And it's really about what she is navigating in this new world, the language, the culture, the foods, the going to school in this new culture. And it's written in verse. Verse, I think, is perfect for this, because her voice is such a unique one, and her struggles with the language, I think, come through so beautifully. And this has a couple of my favorite chapters in all of children's literature. I think one is Wow, and the other is the Vuli Effect. But she writes some amazing and labels some of her, or names her chapters so beautifully. It's just one that you don't want to miss. The writing is exquisite in this book. Let's see what is next. Oh, something completely different. Lily's purple plastic purse. I know someone did their paper on this. This is Kevin Henkes. And Henkes is just, wow, he's just a master of movement in his books. I'll show you some of the images in here, but this is the story of Lily, who is actually a mouse, and she loves her teacher until one day she brings this amazing shiny purple plastic purse and some jingly quarters and her wonderful sunglasses to school, and she just can't contain herself and keep them in her purse until the teacher is finished with story time, and so he has to take them away from her. And she's very, very upset. And I'll never forget when this was read to us by a librarian. I was with my daughter, who was quite young at the time. This was published in 1996. And we just laughed until we were on the floor. Some of the illustrations I think that Henkes includes are so funny, but just want to show you his illustrative style is such that you don't see these full spreads. You see a lot of movement on the pages and often panels. And here's Lily literally leaping right off that fourth panel. So you can really see her movement, the joy in her step. She's quite a rambunctious and interesting little character. And the story is such that while she's angry with her teacher, in the end, she recognizes that she really does love him and that he did the right thing. So it's a fabulously funny and touching story, and one I would recommend. Another really, let's see, no, we're not there yet. We're going to actually some chapter books. So many of you may know this. These are the Chronicles of Narnia, and the one I'm holding here is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and this is by C.S. Lewis, and this one actually has some illustrations by a woman named Pauline Baynes. The Chronicles, this one was published first, 1950, and this series of books, I think, has engendered some criticism and controversy because it is Christian allegory, and there are some, I think, gender, some issues with gender and portrayals of people that can be questionable, but it is very much a work of its time. The reason I'm sharing it with you is there is little to compare with this in terms of high fantasy. He is just a master writer, and the fantasy that he creates in this series is exceptional. This one starts with the 4 Pevensey children who enter this magical world by going through a simple wardrobe, a wooden wardrobe in this old house in London, which is taking place during World War II. And they enter an amazing world in which there's a white witch and the lion Aslan, who I think we recognize as Jesus in Lewis's eyes. But I don't think children are necessarily going to recognize that. I think what they will see is an extraordinary fantasy story and a beautiful and a metaphysical story, I think, in a way. And I brought one other one that I love, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, in which they take a ship across the world. So I brought those out because I think that series of 7 books, if you haven't read them, are really extraordinary literature, and we have to look at them for the time that they were written in, which was the early 50s. Officer Buckle and Gloria, probably my favorite book of all times, because my daughter introduced me to this, and I have to share that. This was published in 1995 by the great Peggy Rathman. I think it is her masterpiece, although she's done some other wonderful things. Won the Caldecott. It had not won that yet when my daughter introduced it to me. She selected it at her Montessori school. She was about 3 years old, and she was at a book fair and brought it home. And I will never forget sitting on the sofa reading it to her and with her, and just laughing and laughing, and her little face looking up at me, and with this look such as, I really picked a good book. Mom really likes this. And she's laughing, hysterically at this. It's the story of Officer Buckle, who is a police officer, and his canine friend, Gloria. And what they do is they go around Napville sharing safety tips, all sorts of safety tips. In fact, the end papers are wonderful because they include a series of safety tips. But inside, what's happening is when they go to the schools, Officer Buckle will seriously read the safety tips, and unbeknownst to him, Gloria is acting them out, and she's doing all sorts of hijinks. And of course, the children know it, and we know it as the audience, but Officer Buckle can't see it. And he does discover it one day when they're filmed, and he does not ever feel the same way about doing these safety tips again. And so Gloria goes by herself, but then, you know, problems ensue. And I think in the end, what they recognize that it's always best to stick with your buddy. And it's a wonderfully funny and beautifully designed book with all, I think if you just look at the way Rathman uses her illustrations to create movement and a lot of energy, just incredible energy. Even the papers, the papers flying across the table. I mean, it's just an incredibly beautifully illustrated and thoughtful book. I think I read, Lolly, that this took her about 4.5 years to complete. I'm not sure if that's true, but I think I remember reading that about it. And I just think it's an absolute masterpiece. It's as funny as can be, and a sweet, touching story of friendship and sticking with your buddy.
What I remember, if I could just say this, is that huge surprise that it won the Caldecott, because such a funny book had never won the Caldecott, and I don't think one has since. And my friend Maeve, actually the same one who wrote the bibliotherapy article many years later, was on the Caldecott that year. I was incredibly jealous of that. And she was terribly proud that they managed to give the award to such a great book and such a funny and unexpected book. So yeah,
it is. It's really, really wonderful. And the safety tips are, you know, they're true safety tips, but they are, some of them are rather funny as well. Never play with spray cans, you know, spraying it in your own face, and always pull the toothpick out of your sandwich. It's very, very funny through and through. So a true favorite of mine. Another one that's a bit of a different look at picture books is called Over and Under the Snow, and this is by Kate Messner, and it's illustrated by Christopher Silas Neal. And if you can see this, it's a very vertical orientation for a book, and this is the story of animals in winter. A little girl, or I think it's a girl, we'll say it's a child, and her father are going cross-country skiing through the woods, and they encounter some animals over the snow, but the illustrations show us what's going on under the snow as well. And as you can see, these are just lovely, sort of subdued illustrations, very bold, but it's a really wonderful look at these animals' lives and, you know, a person's experience with them during a winter day. And the back matter is really helpful. It has these wonderful end pages with snowflakes, but the back matter talks about the various animals. So you could look at each one at a little more in depth, and looking at this subnivean zone, which is what she's writing about, this zone that's under the snow, and all of these animals like bears and moles and voles and rabbits, and even a queen bee and mice that live under the snow during the winter. And so I thought this is really lovely. And Kate Messner did some other books. She did a nice garden one as well. I think that's another one to keep in mind of her books. So snow again. Next one has snow in the title. This is The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. And this is just such a gorgeous book. It was published in 1962. And there was some controversy around this because it was the first book that really had, one of the first, I should say, to explore you know, to have as his main character an African-American child. This is Peter, who goes out on one morning and discovers the snow and goes out to explore. And they're just these gorgeous illustrations with what I think is really collage and paint. Lolly, you may know more about this, but I think that's really what he used. And you can see the boldness and the focus on Peter in his red snowsuit out against the white background and his exploration. But it's really such a freeing, wonderful feeling. It's just such a book where you feel this sense of lightness of being out in the snow and the pristine world. And I think, you know, one could even look at freedom on a larger scale in this. I know some have looked at this and thought about the concept of freedom as well throughout, but it is just a classic, I think, for a lot of reasons. And I know there are some who said Ezra Jack Keats shouldn't have written it because he's not African American. He was born to, I believe, Polish Jewish parents, but he understood the need to have representation of a range of different cultures and races, et cetera, in picture books and children's books. And so this has been a beloved classic, I think, for many, many years.
And he actually grew up in a neighborhood that was mostly African American. And I'll just, if I can take a minute to tell an anecdote that soon after he died, he left all of his paintings, his whole estate, to his best friend. And they were best friends since they were like 5 years old, I think. I had the opportunity to go and appraise all of his original art. And so I got to see, like, up close exactly what went into each of these collages in the snowy day. And it was, you know, talk about a goose pimple experience, except for the fact that we were sitting in this this incredibly hot, stuffy warehouse in Harlem. And so it was also, you know, in the middle of the summer. So it was wonderful when lunch break came around and we can go have some iced tea. But yeah, so just an amazing experience. And Ezra Jack Keats, I already loved him, but once I got up close and personal with his art, I loved him even more.
Yeah, and as you can see, this one won the Caldecott as well, but it's just beautiful. I would love to have one of these on my wall. They're beautiful.
Oh, I know.
Each in and of themselves as works of art. That must have been a wonderful experience for you.
That was pretty neat. Yeah.
Great.
They were being donated to the de Drummond, I think it was. There are a number of places around the US where illustrators can donate their original art and their notes and manuscripts. And so his friend took us to lunch every day that we were doing this. And so we heard some great stories about their childhood. But yeah, so it wasn't that he was going to be selling them. It's just that we needed to know their value so that the museum would know, you know, what the value of his gift was. So just nice folks all around.
No, that's great. And my last book that I have here is Sylvester and the Magic Pebble by William Steig. Lolly's clapping. Actually, anything by William Steig I love. I will hold up one more. I'm not going to hold them all up, but Brave Irene is another one of my favorites. The Amazing Bone, Amos and Boris, you name it. But I brought Sylvester and the Magic Pebble to show you. This is a story of Sylvester, a donkey who finds this magic pebble, and in his wanderings, one day he encounters a lion, and so he wishes that he could become a rock so that the lion can't get him and can't attack him. And of course, as a rock, he's not able to connect with the pebble to make a wish to turn himself back again into who he really is. And his parents, his deeply forlorn parents, go out searching for him. And I won't tell you what happens in the story. Eventually he does come back, but you can see these wonderful illustrations that Steig does. He both writes and illustrates. And what I especially love about his work is that he never writes down to children. He uses very sophisticated language always. Sometimes the themes are even a little scary, but and humorous, but always wonderful stories with very satisfying endings. And you know, if we can just take a look at the last page of this book, so satisfying. There, they eventually had calmed down a bit and had gotten home. Mr. Duncan put the magic pebble in an iron safe. Someday they might want to use it, but really for now, what more could they wish for? They had all they wanted, and that's really just the most satisfying ending, that all they ever really could wish for is one another and just to be together. And Steig has these beautiful beginnings, beautiful endings, and amazing, gorgeous illustrations throughout. That's the other thing. He's so talented as an illustrator as well. So he just is one of these multi-talented people. Look at these gorgeous colors and images throughout. So that is the end of my list, but I would say read anything by William Steig. They're all great.
And isn't it that when they go to the police station to get help finding him, the policeman is a pig?
That's
and
right.
That was something that I think this came out in the late 60s, early 70s, and that was Some people make quite a lot out of that. Yes.
People did make a lot out of that because, well, there's that Steig for you.
There you go, Steig. Yeah. He also did a lot of cartoons for the New Yorker in a very different vein. Kind of, well, you just much more adult. So yes. And then the last two books I've got, these are not children's books, but they're books I think some of you might really enjoy. So the first one relates to Charlotte's Web, which of course you all are reading for this week. And this is the annotated Charlotte's Web. Now, of course, annotated just means notes. So notes about the text by Peter Newmeyer, who's he's really the E.B. White scholar in terms of E.B. White's books for children. And so what this book does, there's a lot of information just about other things, but then once you get into it, you see the page of the book and then notes about that. So for example, he shows what some of the alternate first drafts were for how the book opened, and just all sorts of things. Because of course, this is such a richly written book. And, just down to the fact that, the names of Charlotte's babies, have historical significance in Greek mythology, et cetera, et cetera. So, everything you might want to know about Charlotte's Web is in that book. And then the second and last book I want to show you is this one. It's called Dear Genius. I think I've mentioned before Leonard Marcus, who is the person who edited this. These are the letters of Ursula Nordstrom. And Ursula Nordstrom was an editor at Harper. And somewhere in here, I've got a little crib sheet here, because the thing is, she was the editor for kind of everyone who was pretty amazing back then. And so that includes Margaret Wise Brown. So she was the editor, for instance, for Goodnight Moon, E.B. White for all of his children's books. She is the person who took the little house books that were published in the 1930s and then went out of print pretty quickly. She brought them all back in the 50s and got them all illustrated by E.B. White. So she was just kind of brilliant in what she, her foresight about children's books. Crockett Johnson, who did Harold and the Purple Crayon. So some of these books that were just completely unique and unlike anything that had come before. She's the person who allowed those to happen. She was also John Steptoe's editor for the whole time until she died. And John Steptoe is the one who did that really groundbreaking book called Stevie, which was the first picture book that was written completely in African-American vernacular English. And up until then, people weren't reading books that showed how people actually talk. They were only writing them in the kind of language that we learn to write in school. And so, of course, Stevie also was a groundbreaking book. Oh, also, John Steptoe was African-American and was only 16 when his manuscript was accepted. And he and Nordstrom worked on it for a few years. So he was 19 by the time it came out. But yeah, so Harriet the Spy, we have her to thank for Harriet the Spy, Shel Silverstein. And the first YA book about a gay relationship as well is one that she edited. And she herself was gay too, but as was often the case back then, was closeted professionally. So anyway, just terrific look at how a really good editor communicates with her authors and illustrators. And it's a terrific read. So, and the more of these books, the more fun it is. So that's it. That's our list. I can't believe we're done. Except that I really hope that, both Deborah and I will be hearing from you all, not just, later this year, but in years to come. So just remember that we are some of the resources that you've learned about this year. And you guys have just been amazing. So thank you and good night.
Thanks. Please keep in touch.
Yes.
Bye.